Well, a very, very big welcome to tonight's Bicycle New South Wales webinar. We're really, really excited to be bringing another webinar to everyone, the last one for this year. And tonight's session is all about Against the Odds. It's about a member of Bicycle New South Wales, Mick Dunne, who's been able to join us tonight, and about his return to cycling after a really, really serious crash. So in this webinar, we're going to explore aspects of Mick's accident, his rehabilitation and compensation claim to give people a first-hand account and experience of what it's like to be involved in a serious car crash. My name's Peter McLean and I'm the CEO of Bicycle New South Wales, and I really, really appreciate everyone being able to join us tonight. Firstly, I wanted to quickly have an acknowledgement of country. I'm joining from far southwestern Sydney, which is I guess, the intersectional or meeting lands of the mountains, river and plains, which is the Gundagra, Darug and Dharawal people. So I want to acknowledge their elders, past, present and emerging, and of course recognise their ongoing custodianship. And all of the other areas from people from which people are joining us tonight as well. I want to equally acknowledge those traditional owners as well. Tonight's session is a Q&A session. We have a panel of 3 people, and I'll introduce them very, very shortly. And it's a Q&A discussion, so we'll be going through a number of questions and answers, but we do definitely want to encourage you to ask some questions as well. And you can do that by 2 ways. During the webinar, you can put into the chat your question, and I'll certainly ask them at the end. Or if you feel comfortable enough, you can also raise your hand and take yourself off mute and ask that directly as well, and we'd love to do that. Obviously, in the Q&A session, we're not giving specific legal advice. To do that, you may need to seek specific advice from Advantage Legal, and I'm sure they'd be happy to help you with that. Now, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our panel speakers. I've already introduced myself, but we also have Anna Jaglic, who is the Principal Solicitor at Advantage Legal. And we're really, really proud to be working with Advantage Legal as our exclusive legal compensation partner. Anna is an accredited specialist in personal injury law and has considerable experience in New South Wales personal injury claims. Anna is also an expert in bicycle injury compensation, particularly through the New South Wales CTP scheme and workers' compensation schemes. Bicycle New South Wales has partnered with Advantage Legal due to their dedication in helping the cycling community, not just from a legal perspective, but also from a rehabilitation point of view as well. And our second speaker is a proud and loyal, passionate Bicycle New South Wales member, Mick Dunne, and he is a former client of Advantage Legal. And now, Mick, your story is what every cyclist out there fears the most. And we are going to be obviously talking about some pretty challenging and confronting topics tonight. But we really do believe that it's a really important topic to talk about and highlight and educate and raise awareness on, and ensure that in the rare circumstances that does occur, that you're equipped with the knowledge and information that you need. So Mick was hit by a motor vehicle when going out for a morning ride one morning just over 4 years ago, and it was a very, very serious incident, and that Q&A is going to certainly focus on how that was dealt with between Advantage Legal and Mick tonight. So I'll get straight into it now with the first question, which is to Mick. And Mick, can you, I guess, describe the immediate aftermath of the accident or crash that you were involved in, and how did it affect you physically and emotionally?
Thanks, Peter. To this day, I still have no recollection of the accident. And though apparently I was conscious at the accident scene and in the ambulance, but the first thing I remember is when they were moving me off the gurney in Westmead onto an examination table, and the person moving my leg was not doing it in concert with the people moving my body, and so I was kind of screaming loud enough that my two of my sons were out in the waiting room at Westmead apparently could hear me, which must have been pretty off-putting for anyone waiting in the waiting room there, and it's usually pretty full. So yeah, at that point I was pretty aware that I had a broken femur, but didn't really understand the full extent of my injuries till afterwards when they'd done a full body CT scan. And I'd fractured my C6, my T6, my T7, 2 ribs, my femur, which was right femur, was broken and fairly significantly displaced. And I degloved the top of my right index finger. I think that had gone into my shifters. And so, yeah, but that was the physical stuff. Emotionally, I was at that stage pretty much in shock. And yeah, but I suppose I'm happy to be alive.
Very much for that account, Mick. First question to you, Anna. When you first met with Mick, what was the key legal issues you identified that needed the immediate attention?
Well, Mick just mentioned it just a second ago. Obviously, the most concerning aspect of the claim was that he himself could not recall the accident. And that in itself is problematic for any lawyer. I mean, it's your worst nightmare because you don't know what will be the other side's version of the events that will be put to us, what evidence is out there, and what do we have to challenge, what we have to meet in order to help our client. With Mick not having contemporaneous record of the accident, the first thing that we had to sort of jump on immediately is to that gathering and hunting stage where we try to find all available evidence that we could that would point to how the accident happened, what occurred, who was at fault, and where to take the case from there on. So I'm not going to bother you with all the details and everything else that we had to do in order to progress Mick's case, but it was difficult, it was challenging, because it's not just the insurer that you have to face, you're also facing the other driver. And that driver with Mick's, in Mick's case, wasn't injured. So she had full recollection of the accident, had happened, what happened, and she used that to her advantage for a period of time. We were able to overcome that in the end, but it was a little bit of a rocky start at the beginning, but in the end we got there. Another thing that was obviously quite concerning was treatment. Mick was unfortunately put to a different claims consultant, and that person was a little bit slower with sort of approving treatment and understanding his needs. So that was also another aspect that had to be addressed straight away. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you.
Typical start to the claim.
Absolutely, absolutely. Mick, what was your experience in the hospital? Recovery at home, return to work, of course, as well after that. And is there anything you wish you had known at the time?
Okay. At the time, it was April 2020. Yeah, April 2020. So it was right during the first COVID lockdown. It's just as it started to ease.
Yeah.
And I went to Westmead, and they'd stopped all elective surgery. So Westmead was only about a third full. So I got plenty of attention. Was in the trauma ward. It was still pretty full. But my experience there was first rate. We're blessed in Australia with a functioning, professional, well-staffed public hospital system, I'd say. And the trauma ward where I was, one of the nursing staff, who I don't know his name to this day, but he made me aware of the CTP process, gave me the forms, got me, so he set me off on the first steps to actually putting a claim in. So I wish I knew his name and could thank him. So that was my initial experience.
Absolutely, and yeah, there are some really incredible and wonderful people, or many wonderful people in that hospital and healthcare system. They just do such an incredible job. Uh, Over to you, Anna.
Mhm.
How did you manage Mick's case when the insurer was being, I guess, could you say, difficult or challenging? What steps did you take to ensure the fairest outcome for Mick?
Um, Look, they're not difficult and challenging. It is obviously subjective. Sometimes the insurer can be difficult just because the claims consultant that's dealing with the case either doesn't have enough time or enough resources to deal with the case. Sometimes the insurers are more difficult and challenging because they just don't understand what treatment is needed, or they just plainly refuse to sort of be collaborative and to be proactive. In moments like those, and we had some of those issues with Mick's case, it's a matter that you have to be pragmatic. So first option is obviously pick up the phone, give them a call, try to reason with them. And if that doesn't work, obviously the second option is, well, remind the insurer of their legal obligations, what they have to do, the duties that they have towards the injured person and under the Act to assist him to recover, to rehabilitate himself, to be returned back to work. And after a while, it worked, but at the beginning, it was also quite difficult because that was also the time when the new Act, the new Compensation Act came into place, and a lot of claims consultants were just not trained enough. So they thought that they could just refuse treatment just because they couldn't understand it or didn't understand why it was reasonable, why it was necessary. So it was a little bit challenging in the beginning, but in the end, they decided to collaborate a little bit more and to assist Mick and us in the long run.
Yeah, thanks for that. I probably should have skipped to a previous question to ask prior to that, because I guess it's really important, for accident victims to keep detailed records as part of that process. And how can that, I guess, impact a compensation claim?
Oh, that's certain. I mean, like, keeping good contemporaneous records of the accident scene, the witnesses that were on the accident site immediately afterwards is extremely important. Obviously, with Mick, that didn't happen because he himself couldn't even remember the accident. However, for those claimants and injured people that are involved in the accident, I strongly encourage them just write down everything. Make sure that everything is noted down neatly, and that you know where you store that information. Believe it or not, you may think that you'll never forget the accident, how it happened, where the other side came from, etc. But you will. So as long and all that information will become relevant in the end, whether it's because we're trying to decide on liability, on fault, or who's at fault, or just in the compensation sort of a setting where I'm trying to understand, well, how did the accident happen? How were you, as an injured person, affected by the injuries? What is it that you lost? What opportunities have you lost? So as long as we have records of those opportunities, lost opportunities, they will come in handy later on for me to establish economic loss, any other sort of aspects of your life that were affected, and we then are put in a better position to explain your story to the insurer and the ultimate decision maker, and that in itself does assist in settlement of this claim. Mick was probably one of my favorite clients because he was so detailed in terms of he had evidence of all of his treatment. He knew who were the first respondents at the accident site, and that helped us in establishing liability in the end. Because, although he couldn't recall the accident himself, there were people that saw him after the accident as to where he was found. And all of that assisted in the case in the long run. So again, your solicitor will be extremely thankful if you have all of those details available.
Yeah, some super important tips there. Thanks, Anna. Back to you, Mick. What challenges did you face when dealing with your insurer, and how did that impact your recovery process?
Yeah, just before I answer that, I'll just a little elaborate on I found out who did the initial first aid on me. Well, I spoke to the police and circled back to the attending officer. And Auburn police were excellent. One of the highway patrol on a motorbike. It was the first on scene, coming down off the M4, and two guys from the RFS who were based at Olympic Park, and on their way to work stopped and gave me first aid. So, and they, all kind of formed witnesses to the event, but they also, certainly I was very thankful for them being there and providing first aid. And I subsequently found out, I think it was 4 ambulances attended, because at that stage they weren't being ramped, and everyone was working from home and locked down. But yeah, the insurer initially was pretty attentive, and the case officer was in pretty regular contact. And maybe in hindsight, I'm a bit cynical, because at the beginning I was costing him a fair bit of money in my salary compensation. Later on, as I started to return to work and I was costing them less, I was passed off to another case officer who's probably dealing with more cases, and I think was a bit less experienced and less attentive. It was a generic email address I had to contact them on, a generic phone number. So I'd email and not hear back. I'd ring and leave a message, and then my case officers kept on changing, and I wasn't always told they were changing. So I'd go to contact one and find out, no, I'm not your case officer anymore. So that was quite challenging. And once I engaged Advantage Legal, things kind of changed. Obviously, the insurer kind of then in my opinion, put on a more experienced case officer, because they felt that they were I was now a greater liability financially for them. Physio, my physio was excellent throughout, but later on I found I hadn't been in contact with the case officer for a while, and I went to go to physio to find out they closed my file, but they hadn't even told me. So we got it reopened, and challenges. I did what was in my control, which was attending my GP, doing what he said, and attending my physio and doing what she said. And she was excellent. And getting Advantage Legal involved was the other thing, particularly when I was getting out of my depth with how to deal with the insurer.
Fantastic. That's really, really good to know. And so Anna mentioned you documented things really, really well, Mick, which was a strong advantage. Did you document all those case officers as an example?
Yeah, I kept every email I'd had from the case officers. I kept all my medical reports that I had. And later on, when Advantage Legal, I had them involved, we were actually able to get all my medical records from the hospital, which that was interesting reading. Kind of that closed the gap on some things I wasn't aware of at the time in my treatment. I did speak to the one of the RFS guys who gave me first aid, and he kind of was able to say, "Oh yeah, you were conscious the whole time." I spoke pretty regularly with the attending officer from Auburn, because he was leading the prosecution of the driver who was prosecuted with negligent driving, occasionally grievous bodily harm. And the driver initially did plead guilty to that, but later on appealed the sentencing and got off with just a 12-month community correction order. So that was kind of my tipping point for getting Advantage Legal involved, because I was a bit upset that the driver was basically getting away with less than I would get for going through a speed camera.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's very concerning.
On that
I
point,
guess,
could I, so sorry,
yeah,
Peter,
no, go
I'm
on.
interrupting. On that point, just another thing to add when we're talking about contemporaneous records and sort of making sure that you write down everything. What happens often is that at the time of the accident or immediately after the accident, the other side or the at-fault driver will just say, like, oh, look, I accept I'm at fault. It's all my fault. I didn't mean to. I'm so sorry that this happened. And at that point in time, a lot of people, because it's a normal human reaction then to turn around and say, like, okay, fair enough. Well, he or she, they admitted liability. There'll be no issues. My insurer will be fine with all of that. But if there are still witnesses to that accident, I strongly urge anyone, just note down their details, because before you know it, by that time that driver comes home and thinks about it and realizes that they can get in trouble, that there's possibility that there'll be criminal charges attached to that act. There is a possibility that they will change their version of the events, that they will change that plea of, guilty to not guilty. And at that point in time, you are the only person that will be left out there with no recourse, because you won't have the witness of the accident. I mean, you will know that the witness was there, but if we can't access that witness, we have a problem. So just write down everything, keep it. If I need it, or if your solicitor needs it, they'll use it. But it's better always just record everything, just for your own safety and just to make our life easier in the end. I mean, as I said, Mick was great with that, helped us a lot. So I strongly encourage anyone that's involved in an accident to do the same.
Yeah, we were, that was our case. The driver later on was claiming that she was fully through the intersection and onto the kind of road she was turning into, which just, just did not make sense, from where I ended up and where I would have been cycling. Why would I have got out of a cycling lane, a bike lane, when I had right of way? And we were very lucky there was CCTV footage of that intersection. And, when I watched it later on at the police station, she hadn't even got into the road she was going into when, we hit. So, she was changing her story kind of 15 months later from what she'd originally admitted as, her guilt in the magistrate's court. So, yeah, we were lucky there was CCTV footage. We did have witnesses who saw it, we could call upon, but we didn't need to. Yeah, I would say, record everything, get your witnesses' names. And I now run front and rear cameras on the bikes all the time. So.
Yeah, thanks, Anna and Mick. That is such incredibly important advice, and I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more with those key points, because it is surprising how people change their position, and you should treat that as that confession as if it never happened, and take all that evidence as Anna mentioned. So super important. Another question for you, Mick. How difficult was your rehabilitation, and were there any mistakes you made during your recovery that affected your claim?
Yeah, rehab was pretty hard. I had a cervical collar on for the first 6 weeks, just to stabilize my C6. And I would wake up each morning with a burning pain in my left tricep. And it just felt like it was filled with acid. So it was not a regular pain. And I'd literally sit on the edge of my bed for half an hour in tears until the painkillers kicked in. And that did alleviate over the time as my and it was tied to the C6. Anyway, I was constantly warned about endone, making me constipated. What wasn't stressed was it's actually made me depressed. And yeah, I was pretty depressed, and it was the endone doing it. And I didn't realize that, so that wasn't mentioned. I kind of was more aware of it later. I got off it after about 4 weeks. I was off endone, but I was on the slow release version of that, the Tarjan, for 6 months. And it was the only way I could do my rehabilitation exercises and stuff. And I was I was popping Panadols like Smarties. I was going through about a box of 100 every 10 days. So I'd never had so many pills in all my life as I did in the immediate 6 months after my accident. What wasn't picked up? My right femur ended up 9 millimeters shorter, or my right leg ended up 9 millimeters shorter. And that wasn't really picked up until about 18 months later, when I was having difficulty with my return to running program. And every time I got kind of to about 25, 30 minutes, my right knee just kept on flaring up. And I was, I sent it off to a sports specialist. He immediately, in about 5 minutes, said, I think one of your legs is shorter. Got it scanned, and that we determined that then it was orthotics. By now I was also with Advantage Legal and kind of know these things were getting kind of handled quicker by the insurer because I had some guidance. So in my mistakes, not getting the legal representation earlier. As I said before, the thing which kind of got me moving was when I kind of was seeing a little bit of red when I heard the driver appealed her sentence the next court and got off, and that's kind of motivated me. And I asked my cycling club, so I'm with Park Life Cycles, and I asked around on one of our chats about anyone who'd had experience with a compensation lawyer, and was recommended Advantage Legal. And that's when I went and had my first discussion with Anna. So I wish I'd done that a lot sooner. And since then, I've recommended Advantage Legal to a friend who, again, was hit by a car. He was lucky there was a dash cam on the car behind. He ended up with a severely busted up wrist with about 14 pieces of hardware in it. He's in his 40s, so that's not going to get better over time. So I encourage strongly to kind of go along and see a lawyer, because initially he wasn't going to go and see one. And another friend, his son in his 20s, was on a motorbike and was hit by a car, and again, not at fault, and initially wasn't going to go and do anything about it. So my advice is, go and get some advice, even if it's just going to results in nothing, but get their advice early.
Yeah, again, lots of very, very important tips there. Now, I do have a few questions left, and I guess what I wanted to do, though, was highlight just to the audience that we are doing a bit of a Q&A at the end. So if you did want to, you can ask a question now in the chat and we'll address it if you want to get first in. I've certainly got a few questions myself. To use the chat, it's depending on what version is. I think one of the versions has got a direct link to the chat in your bottom your bottom sort of icons there. For my version that I have, it's under More, which is the far right option. You click on that, and one of the options is just chat, and that will open up a chat bar, and you can obviously ask the question, and I can ask it on your behalf. Or you can put your hand up at the end as well and ask it directly. So I guess the next point really was back to Anna. I mean, from a legal perspective, how do you ensure that a client's rehabilitation process is fully considered in their compensation claim?
It's an interesting question always. Rehabilitation is probably the most essential element of the recovery process after a person has been injured in a car accident or injured at all. And it is very important that the process is transparent, that everyone is accountable, and that all stakeholders participate in that process adequately. I know that on instances or cases that I have seen in the past, sometimes you will have solicitors not being involved in the rehab at all. They will just wait for the rehabilitation to take place, for the person to be stabilized, and then they will have them assessed and progress the case. we approach rehabilitation a little bit differently because we believe that it's important for people to get access to timely and reasonable and necessary rehabilitation straight away. There's no point, in asking for physiotherapy and exercise physiology 3 years after the accident. All of that has to take place as soon as possible. It has to be timely. It has to be provided in accordance with medical advice. With rehabilitation, it's important always to note that a rehab per se, or people that organise the return to work plan or rehabilitation plan, they're supposed to work together with the injured person, the claimant, and also their solicitors and the insurance company. It's not just one person or just the insurer, because the insurer is paying the bill. They're not the most important player in the game. I also would like to stress out to a lot of injured people out there that in the event that you're not getting a good outcome from the rehabilitation, if it is just, let's complete a form, tick some boxes and move on, and you're not getting that sustained benefit, change your rehabilitation advisor. You would do the same thing with a doctor, do the same with the rehab. So again, the people that, just like me, that participate in that rehab, recovery, return to work, they will get the best outcomes in the compensation scheme. So again, it's extremely important to have a good rehabilitation advisor that can assist you and guide you to recovery.
Yeah, thanks very much, Anna. Some more really important points there, and advice for people. The back to you, Mick. What was the overall experience working with Anna and the team at Advantage Legal?
Yeah, excellent. By the time I think I was 12 months in, and I was tired of dealing with the insurer. I realised I was out of my depth. I'm an engineer and I can solve engineering problems, and I do that for a living. But I recognised dealing with the insurer, I needed a professional who was experienced in that. And I certainly realised that I wasn't the insurer's customer. I was just seen as, I was a liability, their customers, their shareholder, and they were working to minimise what their liabilities were with me. So, and Anna dealt with all the roadblocks and all the speed bumps they put up. And in particular, this insurer, well, they denied liability the week before we were going to have a settlement conference. And that was despite, by now, the driver had already pleaded guilty, been found guilty. She'd seen the CCTV footage initially before she pleaded guilty. All that had happened, and yet the insurer was denying liability. So we went ahead and well, Anna dealt with all that. The only thing I had to do is I had to go off down to Auburn Police Station and have a look at myself getting hit by a car, which I really didn't enjoy. And even then, because I couldn't get a copy of it, the insurer continued to deny it until they had seen a copy or they'd seen the CCTV footage. And the day they saw it, they then rolled over and settled. But I didn't have to deal with all that, and I didn't have the skill sets to deal with that. So Anna did all that, and I certainly very glad I got her involved, and she earned every cent of her fee. Yeah, as I've said, I've already personally recommended them, Advantage Legal, to a couple of people, and it doesn't have to be Advantage Legal. It just has to be go and seek some legal advice. But certainly from a cycling perspective, I found Anna and Lee very good at understanding what your rights were as a cyclist, and not just seeing that I got the compensation I was due, but also that I got the rehab and the assistance I needed. And at the end of the day, I would give all the money back I got in compensation to have that 10 minutes of my life back again and not be hit by a car, because I still have pain down my right ITB, and that won't go away. And I've still got a titanium nail through my right femur, and I'll keep that. So all those things, I would happily, rather go back and have my time again. So yeah, that's it. And CCTV footage, as I said, dash cams are a good thing, and I ride with cameras all the time now.
Good point. Cameras can be very, very important, and the footage that they collect these days at very, very high quality and much easier to obviously install and collect than certainly what it was even a few years ago. So technology is continually improving, which is definitely our friend. Back to you, Anna. What are the common problems people have with lawyers in personal injury cases, and how does Advantage Legal address them?
Oh, there's so many problems in CTP cases, and where do we start? We don't have the whole day. Look, there's a lot of sort of issues with personal injury scheme. It is a difficult and complex scheme, and if you're dealing directly with insurance without the benefit of legal advice, it can be quite daunting and it can be quite difficult. The insurer will always have the upper hand because this is probably your first case, your first instance where you have been injured, and you have to then navigate through this whole process. And it can be challenging. I mean, some solicitors get it wrong. So chances of you getting it wrong as an injured person, more than likely, very probable. So always understand that, there'll be issues in the areas such as liability, which is fault. We spoke about that at some detail in this seminar. There's another common area where you will always have disputes with the insurers is in relation to the treatment or wages. But treatment in particular seems to be popping up, at least in my cases. And obviously I say this with a disclaimer because these are the instances that my clients bring to me. There's always a different views as to what treatment is reasonable, what's unnecessary, what's sort of adequate or acceptable for the particular case. And, whereas the injured person and the health providers may form an opinion that the treatment is necessary, the insurer may not think that. This particularly happens in cases where injured people need surgical treatment, because obviously whenever you have a surgery, your injuries are treated as more serious, and there's consequences on the overall compensation outcome in the end. So the insurers sometimes can be quite conservative when it comes to approving that treatment. So what do you do in those instances? I mean, what's my advice there is, obviously, if you have sufficient evidence and if you are of the view that the treatment is reasonable, it's necessary, by all means, challenge the insurer's opinion. But again, as I said before, they will have an upper hand because they've done a lot more of these challenges than what you have. So maybe try to get, a solicitor to have a look to that review or the challenge that you will put to the insurance companies, so that it's done properly, so that, all of your points are noted down. Your success or chance of success will be improved because at the end of the day, you are injured, trying to recover, get back to life. And it's always better to have that objective opinion and advice from someone that has done this a lot, that has experience in the area, that can help you. So from that point of view, obviously solicitors, we do a lot of these disputes for our cases. We are successful, but not always. And we also know that, when you're not successful, then you have to appeal these cases. And appeal process is timely, lengthy, and costly. And it can be, as I said, a challenge for us as well. I would hate to be an injured person to have to deal with that on my own. Even though I'm a lawyer, I would still think that I would get someone else to do it for me, because it can be quite emotional. It can be quite difficult for, when you are literally begging for someone to help you and that's not provided. So again, try to get someone to assist you there and just engage a solicitor to give you an advice. So there you go.
Awesome. Yeah, a super incredibly important advice there and tips. And That's all of the questions that that I had for now. But it is really super pleasing to see that a number of people have made well, there's a number of questions, points, and so I am going to try and address all of them. But if I can't, because there are a few, and I'm sure a few of you might be continuing to do that as well, you can raise your hand as well, and I'll hopefully try and get to you. But if we don't get to all your questions tonight, you can certainly email us, and we'd be very happy to provide further information, answer your questions, or pass you on to Anna and the team, or whoever it might be, info@bicycleNSW.org.au. But we'll get into the questions now. There's a couple around cameras. I'll sort of bunch those together. But the first one is a question from Gopi, and this is a question to Anna. What witness protections and also protections for injured cyclists in these cases, for example, in the case where a bike group, Mick was fortunate not to have an aggressive driver, but some drivers can get quite confronting and threatening, and it can be quite scary and intimidating in those situations. So for both the witness and the injured bicycle rider.
Mm. I've had to deal with a few of those cases in the past myself, and it's true. There is a lot of people, a lot of drivers that can be quite aggressive after the accidents. So they won't accept liability. They will start to intimidate the injured person, the witnesses, anyone that sort of tries to intervene. My advice is to just call the police instantly. Do not sort of try to engage that person. Don't try to sort of position yourself in a safe spot so that, you know, that he doesn't run you over, that the person doesn't sort of hurt you or anything to that effect, but call the police straight away. Let them know that there's an issue, and trust me, they will be there within seconds. And ordinarily, whenever you pick up the phone to call the police, you'd be surprised to see how often the aggressor just calms down and there's no longer an issue.
Yeah, important point, and that, I mean, goes to highlight the always about that document, no matter what the situation might be. Dave's got a question around he was also involved in an accident, and always sorry to hear that. He was initially I guess quoted by a lawyer that I guess it was far too overwhelming and very hard to I guess make a reference to it and understand the process. It took him 2 years before he felt he could understand what he needed to do. And so I guess he'd liked to see, well, he suggested some stronger guidance and tips from Bicycle New South Wales, which we can certainly look at. But what can he expect to happen after an accident? And even if it's just information on the website. So that's certainly something we can look at with maybe advancing with Advantage Legal. But do you have any, what should people expect when they first seek legal advice, Anna?
It is an overwhelming process. And, you know, once upon a time, I keep saying this all the time, this was a relatively straightforward and simple process. But ever since the Act has been changed back in 2017, it became extremely complicated. There's so many disputes. There's so many areas of the insurer sort of challenging the accident, the need for the treatment. So it's very, very hard sort of to give just, you know, a simple advice saying, well, this is what you're supposed to, this is what you can expect from the accident. And it's also an evolving area of the law, because whenever you have changes in the Act, there's changes in the precedent. So yes, it can be quite complicated, but what can you expect is obviously following the accident, you have to obviously try to get medical assistance as soon as possible, record the accident, make sure that you report it to the police, and then lodge your claim with the at-fault insurer. Try to get some advice before that claim is lodged, because there can be so many sort of different scenarios where the vehicle that hit you could be insured, uninsured, not registered, perhaps not registered in New South Wales. There's so many different scenarios. So I would always say, maybe just get some free legal advice straight away. Either call Bicycle NSW or just get in touch with us and we'll try to guide you through that process.
Thanks, Anna. And that's maybe something we can take offline and look at it a little bit more comprehensively as well. There's a couple of questions around cameras, which is always good. We spoke about getting evidence and documenting, and that's drawn out a number of points and questions around cameras. The first one is around particular cameras, which people recommend and what to look at when buying a new camera. And someone has asked you, Mick, what camera you use.
Yeah, I'm using Cyglic.
Right.
I got, one on the front, one on the back. The front one's excellent. The back one, their version 3 is not so waterproof. The version 2 is really good, waterproof. So I'm mindful if it starts raining. I usually whip it off and put it in my back pocket, but I don't ride in the rain too much. Yeah, they're invaluable, for whether it's close passes or people kind of yelling at a or whatever people are doing. I'm quite happy to have the cameras there. And I think more drivers are aware that cyclists have got cameras now. It's like people with dash cams. So it can influence their behaviour if they realise you might be recording it. So
a great point there. Fernandez has made I guess a general comment saying that they obviously completely agree with that camera advice. They were unfortunately hit by a car recently. There was no witnesses and there was no CCTV footage available in the area. Their driver was apologetic but did not admit fault, and they were incredibly lucky to have the camera with them on the bike, and they were found at fault by the police. So that just really fundamentally highlights the importance of that.
If I could just add one thing to that, if you don't mind. Sorry, I'm interrupting again. I seem to be doing that a lot today. Sorry.
Not at all.
Just because someone is found to be at fault by the police, it doesn't mean that that decision will carry on to the insurer. Insurer has a right to investigate the case and determine liability on their own. So, whereas it's helpful that the police officers are holding them to be at fault, as Mick indicated before, that can be changed later on if the person decides to challenge that, and the insurer is not always bound by that opinion. Just a little bit of a disclaimer there.
That's a really important point to make. Helpful, but not always not always everything that you need. And Fernanda has backed that up. They use a cyclic camera as well. I know that they're quite popular. Dave's mentioned he uses a GoPro 4, which is a more recent model, and he's got it on a setting that takes a frame every few seconds. So that's obviously that is a good option as well. Lots of points being made here, which is fantastic to see. Keep scrolling down though, which is quite challenging. And someone else has made a point how the FAQ section on the Advantage Legal website, which is always helpful. And I'm pretty sure that's linked on the Bicycle New South Wales website as well, but perhaps we could try and make that a little bit more prominent, I guess. The other point, and if anyone else has got any questions, feel free to ask them. I've certainly got one question, it's probably for both Anna and Mick. We have really touched on documentation a number of times throughout this session. What's the best way of documenting? I guess everyone does things slightly differently, but I mean, would a diary be a good process, or is it best to try and, I guess obviously you want to try and keep soft copies on a laptop or computer somewhere as well? what are some of the better ways and most sort of organized ways of that you've seen people document and keep that information and that timeline and that evidence?
I think probably Mick is going to be the best person to answer that question, because he was probably one of my most organized claimants that I've ever worked with in my whole life. Having said that, what we as Advantage Legal do for our clients, as soon as they sort of become a client, we provide them with the link to a portal, which is obviously Australian sort of based portal, where they can document the entire journey and sort of just drop off, literally drag and drop their evidence into the portal. Which automatically allows us access to it. So we will straight away know what's happening with them, how the rehabilitation is going, if there's any other issues with treatment, etc. So that's how we try to help our clients, those that are not as great as record keeping as Mick was. So, but otherwise, I'll just give that answer to Mick now.
Yeah, look, I just kept, I had to go to my GP pretty regularly. When you're on endone, which is it's an opioid, you can only get a very small script, so you've got to keep getting back to get those renewed. So I was seeing him for reviews pretty regularly. So I was getting those medical certificates, which I was scanning, sending those to the insurer, but also keeping copies of all those. So I had a pretty thorough record of all my treatment and what had been recommended through him. My physio was very good in terms of writing reports to which are available for my GP, me, but also I was able to pass them to Anna. And I was kind of just keeping a diary of all my medical appointments, so when I'd had them. So I was able to kind of document all my medical rehab pretty well, and I'd kept all the email from the insurer. So I had every single email I'd had, and I kept all those. So I was able to pass those all to Anna when I engaged Advantage Legal. So yeah, I just encourage you to keep all your documentation, scan it, and just be thorough. Just know, even if it's a simple diary entry of, when you went to the, your GP, or when you went to physio and those things. You've got your record of all your scripts, because they'll get loaded up into your health records. So you should be able to kind of, access all that as well. But there was a lot of information from the hospital. That was like, it was over an hour, and it was about 200 pages of reading. There was a lot of from the hospital, and that kind of filled in some of the gaps. And when we got that, that was helpful for filling in some of the gaps, because I didn't realise how much morphine they'd given me at the scene. So how they got the hospital got me to sign consent to have my operation, I don't know, because I was off with the fairies. So yeah, keep your documentation, keep it organised. But I waited, in hindsight, too long to go and get some legal advice. So I'd advise people to, if you've had a serious accident with a vehicle, and you're not sure of the CTP scheme, which the majority of us won't be, go and get some legal advice from a professional. And have a good community around you. I had a very good physio. I probably should have seen a psychologist as well, but my physio was actually pretty good. Just because I don't think my head was right for quite a while, and that could have been something that the insurer possibly should have paid for. I was lucky; I had a very good cycling club around me, and they helped me kind of get back to riding. And I was riding really kind of on a mountain bike, doing 18 kilometers an hour for my first ride. And yeah, they just helped and encouraged me getting back to kind of, riding somewhere near the level I was riding before I had my accident. So yeah, have a good support network around you really helps.
Thanks, Mick. That's Some really important points and takeaways there as well. The other camera that just came to mind as well is it's a new one on the market. And like I said before, technology's continually changing. There's a new one called Insta360. And I saw it in action the other day. I was it's absolutely incredible technology in that it has two cameras which creates a 360-degree vision of every single angle. So if that, for example, is helmet mounted, it provides every single angle, and you can navigate all the different possibilities there, because I see a lot of vision unfortunately, from a number of different cameras mounted on bikes from front and rear angles. And often it's quite challenging because it's like, I know that that's the case, but you just can't really prove it too much because of the different angles that are captured. And so I guess the point is that that's something to consider, but more importantly, this sort of technology is becoming more and more common, and no doubt over the next 12 months, there'll be other models that that do similar things. Probably Cyclic will bring out one as well, and it's getting cheaper and better and smaller and lighter and easier to download and all the rest of it. So that's only a positive thing for all of the things that we've spoken about tonight. Just to wrap things up, the last point that Dave made was concussion's a really tough injury for cyclists, and the journey has been hard through the assessment, as it's hard for showing the 10% required requirements if it does persist. It's an invisible injury that makes the journey really, really hard to prove. And his case is lingering on 7 years. So it makes the legal side to be it'd be good to see things change to try and recognise these these ongoing challenges, which of course head trauma is a major problem. So that's certainly a fair point. Well, we're just about at time now, so I should definitely wrap things up. I want to thank particularly Mick for his incredibly honest and candid recounts and advice, which he's been able to provide through certainly an incredibly traumatic experience, and I know that would have been very, very hard to recount and communicate. So we really do appreciate that, Mick. Raising awareness and education on that is incredibly important, and we want to thank you so much for your time and contribution. And Anna, thanks so much for your really, really important, I guess, legal counsel and advice and tips. There's been so many sprinkled right from start to finish, and it's really, really helpful. Those real practical tips that people can use and implement if they're unfortunately involved in something similar to this, or if they have a friend or family member, loved one that's involved as well. They can pass on that advice, and hopefully that will certainly help them. So I wanted to thank all of our participants for joining us as well tonight. We always welcome your feedback, and I guess we're always looking at trying to sort of improve and advance the format and layout of these webinars, so that ultimately we put them together for you, and we want to ensure that you get the most impact and value out of them. So feedback on that is always welcome. info@bicycleNSW.org.au. And of course, we are also wanting to receive your feedback and ideas on topics that we might want to cover for next year as well. Obviously, Advanced Legal is going to talk about legal aspects and compensation areas, which we want to continue to do. But maybe there's other burning topics that we should also be covering as well. And we'd love to hear your ideas and opinions from that. So for now, I wanted to thank everyone for their attendance and their participation. We've all got so much out of tonight. I've certainly learned a lot myself, and I really, really appreciate everyone's support and attendance. Make sure you ride safe, And until next time, we look forward to talking then. Thank you.